Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. The sound of rain against the windows has a way of stirring old memories, and sometimes those memories are not as simple as we want them to be. That night, the storm was pouring heavy outside, thunder rolling in the distance, and I never expected that a quiet evening at home would change the way I saw everything around me. What began as just another rainy night slowly turned into something that blurred the lines of trust, affection, and choices I never thought I'd make. This is not an easy story to tell, but it is one I can never forget. I was 20 years old, still finding my way through life, still figuring out who I was and what kind of future I wanted. Living at home came with its own challenges, but it also gave me comfort. My mom had been away that weekend visiting her sister, leaving the house unusually quiet. That left me and my stepdad, David, alone in the house. David was in his mid-40s, a man who had always carried himself with calm confidence. He wasn't just a father figure, he had been someone I could talk to, someone who had guided me when I felt lost. I respected him deeply, and maybe that was why what happened later felt so impossible, yet so inevitable at the same time. The night began so ordinary. Dinner was simple, laughter easy, and the sound of rain outside felt strangely soothing. But as the hours stretched on, the mood in the house shifted. The storm knocked out the power, leaving us in the soft glow of candles scattered around the living room. The silence between us was no longer just silence, it was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts neither of us wanted to admit. Every glance lingered longer than it should. Every word seemed to hold a double meaning. It was as if the rain outside was washing away the rules we had always lived by. As I sat there across from him, listening to the storm, I couldn't ignore the way my heart was racing. His eyes caught mine more than once, and I wondered if he could hear my thoughts as loudly as I could feel them. The closeness, the stillness of the house, the warmth of the candles, it all became a backdrop for something that felt dangerously close to crossing a line. I remember asking myself over and over, was this real, or was it just the storm playing tricks on my mind? Sometimes, the hardest part of any story is admitting the moment where everything could have gone differently. That night, I realized how fragile boundaries really are when emotions and loneliness collide. And as the rain continued to fall harder outside, I knew that nothing would ever be the same after what almost happened, or what did happen. The rain didn't let up that night. It beat against the roof like a steady drum, filling the house with a rhythm that made the silence between us even louder. The candles flickered with each gust of wind, shadows stretching across the walls in ways that made everything feel more intimate, more secret. David leaned back on the couch, his shoulders relaxed, but I could sense there was something in the air he wasn't saying. I sat across from him, pretending to focus on the storm, but every part of me was aware of his presence. To understand why that night mattered so much, you'd have to know a little about the bond we shared before then. David had come into my life when I was still a teenager. My mom had fallen in love with him after years of being on her own, and while it wasn't easy at first, he earned my trust. He wasn't the type to force himself into my world. Instead, he had this calm way of listening, of being there without judgment. When I struggled with school or felt like life was too much, he always found the right words to bring me back down. I grew used to his steady presence, and in time, it almost felt natural that he was part of our family. But being 20 comes with its own challenges. I was in this in-between stage, old enough to know what responsibility meant, but still young enough to feel restless and unsure. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered about love, about the kind of connection people talk about but rarely find. I wasn't in a relationship at the time, and loneliness has a way of sneaking in when you least expect it. Maybe that's why the quiet company of someone I trusted felt so comforting that night. David wasn't just some ordinary man. He had this presence about him, a strength in the way he carried himself, but also a softness when he spoke. I noticed the small things more than I wanted to admit, the way he ran his hand through his hair when he was thinking, the sound of his laugh, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. I never thought much of it before, but that night, with the storm holding us captive, it was impossible to ignore. We talked about simple things at first. Movies we'd watched, stories from his younger days, even the way the rain used to comfort him as a kid. But under the surface, there was something else in our voices, an unspoken layer neither of us dared to name. I found myself watching him when he wasn't looking, and every time our eyes met, my heart skipped in a way I couldn't explain. The more the storm raged, the more it felt like the house was its own world, separate from the rules of everyday life. No phone calls, no outside noise, just two people caught in a moment that felt heavier than words. Every laugh lingered a little too long, every pause stretched just enough to feel like a choice. I could feel a pull between us, something I tried to ignore but couldn't escape. It was strange, because nothing happened. Yet everything happened. A glance, a smile, the way his voice softened when he said my name, all of it wove together into a tension that grew with every passing hour. I knew there was a line we couldn't cross, but the question that haunted me was, what if we already had, without even realizing it? Have you ever felt that, when someone you've known for so long suddenly feels different, almost like you're seeing them for the first time? That night made me question where the boundaries really were, and whether they were as unshakable as I had always believed. The rain outside never stopped, and neither did the thoughts circling in my head. The rain kept pouring, hours slipping by without either of us realizing how late it had become. The house felt smaller somehow, like the storm had locked us in a world of our own making. I sat on the arm of the couch while David leaned back, his eyes half focused on the candlelight, half lost in thought. There was something in the way he looked that night, a mixture of calm and conflict, like he was holding back words he didn't know how to speak. And maybe that was what unsettled me most, because I felt the same. The main conflict wasn't just between him and me. It was inside me. On one hand, I knew the boundaries, the roles we were supposed to keep. On the other, there was this pull, this undeniable closeness that felt both dangerous and comforting at the same time. Every laugh, every story we shared that night only added to the weight of it. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside my chest. Part of me tried to distract myself with memories. I thought about my mom and how happy she seemed with David. She had always said he was the kind of man she could rely on, someone who brought stability into her life. Seeing them together had made me believe in love again, after years of watching her struggle alone. And yet here I was, sitting in the dark with him, feeling a connection I wasn't supposed to feel. That guilt wrapped itself around every thought, but the truth was harder to escape. The bond between us wasn't one-sided. I could feel it in the way his voice softened, the way his glances lingered. To complicate things more, I remembered a time a few months back. We had gone grocery shopping together, just the two of us. It was ordinary, nothing special, but there had been a moment in the parking lot when our hands brushed as he reached for the bag. It was innocent, but the way my stomach flipped that day lingered long after. I had pushed it aside, convincing myself it meant nothing. But now, with the rain wrapping the house in quiet isolation, those moments came back sharper than ever. Another part of the conflict was the loneliness I carried. At 20, it felt like everyone around me was in a relationship, moving forward in ways I couldn't. Friends posted pictures with their partners, celebrating milestones, while I stayed home, wondering when it would be my turn. David filled that empty space without even trying. His attention, his kindness, the way he listened. Was it wrong that I wanted more of that, even if it meant stepping into something I shouldn't? He broke the silence at one point, asking softly if I was cold. It was such a simple question, but it carried more weight than I could explain. My answer didn't matter as much as the pause that followed, the way we both seemed to hold our breath in that fragile space between words. That was the core of it, not what was said, but everything that wasn't. Looking back, I think the conflict wasn't just about what might happen, it was about the choices we were both tempted to make. Choices that could change everything forever. And maybe that's why it felt so heavy. Because deep down, we both knew that one wrong step could turn a rainy night into something we couldn't undo. The storm outside only grew stronger, thunder rolling like a warning, but inside the house everything felt still, almost too still. The candles were burning lower now, the soft flicker of light casting long shadows across the walls. I could hear the rain hitting the windows in waves, drowning out the rest of the world. It was as if the night itself was conspiring to keep us there, caught in a space where time didn't matter. David shifted slightly on the couch, his eyes catching mine in the dim light. For a long moment, neither of us looked away. It was such a simple thing, just eye contact, but it carried the weight of everything we had avoided saying all evening. My breath quickened, and I could see the same tension written across his face. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, full of questions that had no easy answers. I moved closer without even thinking, settling onto the couch beside him. It wasn't a bold decision, just a small one, but the air changed instantly. His arm brushed against mine, and I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The house creaked with the force of the storm, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Part of me wanted to break the silence, to say something that would ease the weight pressing down on us. But what could I say? That I had been feeling this pull for months without admitting it to myself? That sitting here with him felt like stepping onto a line I wasn't sure I could step back from. Every word I wanted to speak stayed trapped in my throat. Instead, we kept talking about the most ordinary things: the storm, the power outage, how my mom would probably laugh at us lighting candles like it was the old days. But underneath every word was something unspoken, something that made my skin tingle with awareness. I could see it in the way his hand tightened around the glass he was holding, the way his voice faltered when he said my name. The tension reached a point where even the smallest movement felt like a decision. His hand rested on the couch cushion between us, close enough that I could feel the heat of it. My fingers itched to move just slightly closer, to close the space that had suddenly become the biggest distance in the world. The storm gave another crash of thunder, the lights of the candles flickering dangerously low. For one suspended moment, it felt like the house, the night, and the storm itself were all holding their breath, waiting to see what we would do. Have you ever been in a moment where time slowed down, where every choice felt like it could change everything? That's where I was, caught between fear, desire, and the unknown. And in that fragile pause, right before the night reached its breaking point, I realized there was no turning back. The thunder outside rattled the windows, but what shook me more was the silence between us. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, like something invisible had settled in the room, daring either of us to acknowledge it. I thought that night had already reached its peak of tension, but I was wrong. Because just when I thought I understood the pull between us, something happened that pushed everything further than I was ready for. A sudden knock echoed through the house. At first, I thought it was just the storm playing tricks on us, branches hitting the siding, but then it came again, louder this time. My heart jumped into my throat. Who could possibly be at the door in the middle of a storm like this? David stood, hesitating for a second, then walked toward the hallway. I followed, the sound of the rain beating harder as he opened the door. Standing there, drenched from the storm, was my cousin Jenna. She was only a year older than me, 21, and she lived a few blocks away. Her car had broken down, and she had walked through the rain to find shelter. The look of relief on her face when David opened the door was clear, but the shock of her sudden arrival sent a rush of confusion through me. The spell of the night had been broken, at least for a moment. We quickly brought her inside, wrapping her in blankets and giving her something warm to drink. The candles flickered across her wet hair, the storm roaring behind her, but all I could think about was how different the energy in the room had become. What had been a quiet, private tension was now complicated by the presence of someone else. Jenna had always been the type to notice things most people overlooked. And almost instantly, I felt her eyes studying me and David as we sat back down. Maybe it was the closeness, the way I had unconsciously leaned a little too near him, or maybe it was just the charged atmosphere that still lingered despite the interruption. Whatever it was, I knew she felt it. The second twist of the night wasn't just that Jenna had shown up, it was that her presence forced us to confront what had been happening silently between us. Her curious glances, her questions about why the lights were out, why we were sitting so close with candles glowing around us, all added to the pressure. David answered calmly, his usual steady self, but I could see the tension in his jaw. I felt it too, like we were both trying to keep a secret hidden in plain sight. And then, Jenna said something that nearly stopped my heart. She laughed lightly and said, "You two look so cozy." almost like a couple riding out the storm together. She didn't mean anything serious by it, but the words hit harder than thunder. I froze, unsure of how to respond. David smiled faintly, brushing it off with a joke, but our eyes met in a way that betrayed the truth neither of us could admit. That moment changed everything. What had been an unspoken tension was now dragged into the open, even if Jenna didn't fully realize it. And suddenly, the stakes felt higher. It wasn't just about what we felt, but about what could happen if anyone else noticed. The storm outside raged louder, as if echoing the storm inside me. Every second stretched longer, every glance carried more weight, and I realized that the night was no longer just about two people caught in a moment. It was about the risk of being seen, the fear of exposure, and the choices that could not only change us, but ripple into everyone around us. Have you ever been caught in a situation where someone's unexpected presence made everything more complicated? What would you have done if you were me, kept the secret buried deeper, or admitted the truth no matter the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me what you think might happen next, because the night was far from over, and the real climax was still waiting. The storm finally began to ease, though the sound of the rain was still steady against the windows. The three of us sat in the living room, the candles burning low, and the tension was impossible to ignore. Jenna seemed comfortable now, sipping her tea and wrapped in a blanket, but every time she glanced at me and David, I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't shake the echo of her earlier comment, and I knew he couldn't either. It was as if the very thing we'd tried to keep unspoken was now hanging in the air, impossible to deny. When she finally drifted off to sleep on the couch, the house felt smaller than ever. David and I sat in silence, barely inches apart, the storm outside now nothing more than a soft drizzle. It should have been easier to breathe, but it wasn't. I turned toward him, my heart racing, and for the first time all night, he didn't look away. His eyes held mine, steady, conflicted, yet filled with something I couldn't mistake anymore. "This can't go on," he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. The words should have been final, a wall between us, but instead, they only pulled me closer. Because behind them, I heard what he didn't say, that it already had gone on, that the boundary we were so afraid of crossing had already blurred. I wanted to speak, to admit what had been building for months, but my throat tightened with fear. And then came the twist I never saw coming. As I struggled for words, Jenna stirred, her voice cutting through the room. "I'm not asleep," she whispered. My heart dropped. She sat up slowly, her eyes sharper than before, fixed on both of us. "I know what's going on," she said softly, almost too calm. "And you need to decide right now what this means, because pretending isn't fooling anyone anymore." The room went silent again, but not the same silence as before. This one carried weight, a demand, a truth that had been forced into the open. For a moment, the storm outside and the storm inside collided, and I realized we had reached the point where there was no going back. David looked at me, then at Jenna, his expression torn between guilt and something deeper. I felt the air shift, the realization that everything we'd kept hidden was no longer just between us. The climax wasn't in what we did, but in what had finally been exposed. And in that moment, I understood that the night hadn't just changed me, it had changed all of us. The room felt frozen after Jenna's words, as if the last bit of candlelight had been swallowed by the weight of her revelation. Neither David nor I could move at first, caught between guilt and relief that the truth had been dragged into the open. My heart pounded, but as the silence stretched, I realized something had shifted. The storm outside was finally easing, and maybe the storm inside us had reached its peak too. David was the first to speak. He admitted quietly that the closeness between us had gone too far, even if nothing had been said out loud before. His honesty surprised me, but it also gave me clarity. For months, I had been tangled in feelings I couldn't name, wondering if they were one-sided. Now I knew they weren't. But knowing didn't make them right. Jenna, to my surprise, didn't react with anger. She looked at us both and said, "Sometimes emotions blur lines we never thought we'd cross. But you have to ask yourselves if this is about love or about loneliness." Her words landed with a weight I couldn't ignore. She was right. The storm, the isolation, The quiet company, it had all created the perfect setting for temptation to grow. But deep down, I knew what love really meant, and it wasn't this. The rest of that night passed slowly, almost painfully. We didn't speak much after that, but the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy with unspoken tension, but with reflection. By morning, the storm had cleared, sunlight pouring through the windows like a fresh start. Jenna left early, promising not to say anything, but reminding me to think carefully about what mattered most. When my mom returned later that day, the normal rhythm of the house returned with her. Watching her laugh with David, I felt a sting of guilt, but also a wave of understanding. What I had mistaken for something deeper was really a moment of vulnerability, fueled by loneliness and circumstance. David and I never spoke about that night again, but the distance between us became clear. Respect returned, but it carried with it the memory of a line almost crossed. Looking back now, I realize the lesson was about boundaries, choices, and the way emotions can trick us in vulnerable moments. Love is not built in secrets or fleeting tension. It's built in trust, honesty, and the ability to walk away when temptation whispers. That rainy night taught me more about myself than I wanted to know, but it also helped me see the kind of love I truly wanted for my future. What about you? Do you think loneliness can make people see connections where there shouldn't be any? Would you have handled things differently if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to see a sequel to this story, let me know, because sometimes the past has a way of returning when we least expect it. Summary: on a stormy night, boundaries blurred between a young woman and her stepdad when loneliness and tension collided. An unexpected visit from her cousin forced the truth into the open, leading to difficult realizations about love, trust, and temptation. The story unfolds with suspense and reflection, ending with lessons about choices and the strength to walk away. 3.